we operate in. Let me just dive straight into it. I'll quickly introduce the panel. I'll take a few minutes to just set the context, and then with the rich experience we have on the panel, we'll straight away get into that. The topic at hand is customer journeys. It's been spoken about often, and especially nowadays, and what does it really entail and what does it really mean in terms of reimagining customer journeys, delivering this to customers. But with the panel you have and with the varied experience on that, it would be interesting to hear their views. Let me quickly do the introductions. We have, to my left, Mr. Pablo Suarez, who's the global leader for digital banking at IBM. We have Shanti, who heads the consumer bank at Kotak. We have Rajeev, the executive director at RBL Bank. Manju Agarwal, the DMD at State Bank of India. Sudhakar, who actually is the CEO of Aditya Birla Payments Bank. Shinjini heads consumer bank for Citibank, and then we have Nishant, who's the founder and CEO for CRMNext. Just a couple of points, just actually 4 points just to set the context, and then we'll get into this. Customer experience is something that's been thought about by banks for years, for decades, because at the end of the day, that's what you deal in, day out. Our view is that in today's world that banks operate in and will operate in, it's in terms of as a lever of competitive advantage, it's going to become even more and more critical. And the simple logic for it is that customer acquisition costs and more importantly, customer switching costs have dramatically fallen. As customer switching costs fall dramatically, the ones who win are the ones who can actually deliver a much better experience to their customer using data and technology, and therefore maximize the value you get from acquiring customers. The second point is customer journey is not process digitization, it's beyond process digitization. So think of this, it's not about just opening an account in the most seamless manner, it's about starting a relationship with the customer in the deepest possible manner so that actually the bulk of the customers you acquire end up becoming your primary customer. The third thing that I would say is that if done well, the impact is pretty transformative. When we've seen this, when we've looked at this closely, you not only reduce costs significantly, you actually prepare a platform for much stronger revenue growth and a culture of innovation. And the last thing that I would say, again, a cliched word that's talked about a lot nowadays, but agile and how quickly you deliver solutions to market is not a good to do thing, but a necessity in today's world where the time to taking solutions to market is rapidly reducing. And again, if you do this in the right manner, it reduces time to market by 2 to 3 times, improves employee productivity by similar metrics, and more importantly, you have a higher engaged employee force. So, just looking at the context that we operate in today, I think it's very pertinent that customer journeys and how we actually reimagine that becomes a much more integral part of Indian banking. With that, let me start off. I'm going to start off with Ms. Manju Agarwal, State Bank of India, has been as we've always said, an institution which has set the benchmarks for the Indian industry over the decades gone by. And they are in the process of digitally transforming themselves and looking at customer journeys. Ma'am, would be interesting to hear your views around how State Bank has gone through this journey over the last few years. And one other thing that I'd like you to touch upon is, whenever banks embark upon digital transformation, people and the organization also sit at the core of it. It's not just a technology game. So how has State Bank actually got the organization mobilized around it would also be useful to hear.
A very good morning. Let me try to set a context to what we propose to discuss here today. We all know environment is undergoing a huge change. And we also know that environment changes are going to impact the changes inside the organization. Let me quote Mr. Jack Welch, former chairman of GE. He says, if the rate of change on the outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, the end is near. So probably we are living in this world where the change on the outside is very, very rapid. And unless we are agile enough and we cater to those changes and change our ways, how we service our customers, how we make our products more acceptable to the customer, probably end is going to be very near. Now, how do we do that? And we are in a world where we are not competing only with our peers, we are also competing with fintechs. We all know fintechs are very agile in terms of their approaches, their business models, and their concepts. And it's not only fintechs. Fintechs, we all believe that they are startups. They do not have the financial muscle that we have. We are also competing with GAFA. I hope all of you know what GAFA is. Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, and Alibaba. And how do they cheer their customers? I don't think they're cheering their customers based on digitization, because the way to access these platforms is through digital means. And what banks today are struggling, we're trying to give a digital platform to the customer. I don't think that's important, because anyways that's available to the customer. What is more important, how we make his digital journey more fruitful to him. And that will happen only when we are able to do a good data analytics. And when we talk about data, we are not talking about the data only of the customer, which probably CRM helps banks to do. It's the data of the mass per se. In a particular customer segment, what is the data? What are the learnings that we get? What is it that the customer can derive value by looking at the competitors' data? That's what we have to make available to the customer. Are we doing that? In fact, I was talking to one of my groups, and I was telling them that we are sitting on huge data, we banks. But data, if it is not used, it's like fish to the vegetarian. You have data, you're not using it. It becomes a liability, actually. So though we are sitting on data, are we making adequate use of it? And I believe that the data can be used to improve the experience of the customer. Probably the next war in the world is going to be for the data, not for oil. And we banks, we need to find ways and means how to first sanitize the data, if it is not sanitized, and after that, how we make use of it to deliver a better customer experience.
Thank you, ma'am. I'll come back to you. Shanti, I just wanted to get your thoughts. The bank actually has very successfully launched a digital proposition in the market. You have that, plus you obviously have your bread and butter branch network, which continues to aggressively drive acquisition. As you all have gone through the journey, any perspectives around how you thought about reimagining what you deliver to the customer, and also how do you do it in a manner which is taking it quickly to market, because space is also important?
So to start with, actually, banks are the most easy places to disrupt, because historically banks love paper, siloed, vertical, not horizontal, and onerous processes and hands-offs. So when you look at this, and when you look at a new age customer, as Manju rightly said, who are dealing with GAFA and who have had a very different experience, you need to completely reimagine everything. You know, when we launched 811, the whole thinking was, how do you bring down the cost of acquisition? And at the same time, make a customer feel very good about the way they open a bank account. Historically, you think of opening a bank account, you think, oh God, 80 signatures, this thick booklets, 50 pages of papers, etc. Now, and I must actually compliment the government for introducing, you know, an infrastructure called Aadhaar through biometric, where you can simply get details of a customer for doing KYC and open an account. So I think regulations have played a very important role in some of the at least in the 811 digital innovation we launched. And let me tell you, customers just lapped it up, because here was a time, here was something that they could, at the middle of the night, and it's interesting, the highest traffic we see is between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. in the morning. You think somebody wants to open a bank account at that time? So clearly experience, giving a customer a superior experience, I think works. But you know, you talked about the fact that you have a branch network. I don't think you can take that away from the customer. I think the world is still phygital, which means they want the physical comfort, but the digital excellence of doing all their transactions and all their interactions with people. So when you look at the whole journey process, it's about reinventing, as you said, your process, digitizing it, but it is also thinking about what does the customer want and how do you deliver it omni-channel. So the problem is a customer comes to a branch, customer goes to an ATM, customer comes to the net, customer goes to the mobile, customer calls to the call center. How do you deliver a superior experience at every one of those channels when you have people at some of those channels and you have only, you know, machines at some of those channels? How do you create that omni-channel experience? So I think as a bank, and I can talk about ourselves, we are looking at reinventing every journey, all products, all processes, as well as what else do you offer the customer. See, you're going to distinguish, just process alone won't distinguish you. Just product alone won't distinguish you. And yes, today's innovation is tomorrow's hygiene. It gets followed. So I think I can talk about India. Indian customers never had it so good. Banks, non-banks, e-commerce, everybody are fighting over themselves to give them a superior experience, superior, paybacks, if I may say so, superior propositions. It is here to stay. And I think you've got to constantly reinvent and, as Apple says, try to find out what a customer knows before they know that they need it. I think those are the people who are going to win the game. I think the journey is long. We've just begun. A lot of talk happens, a lot of discussions happen. At the end of the day, it is about completely reimagining your back end. Again, the mistake that most people do, they think that customer journey is just about the front end. You build a nice app, it's easy to get into the app. But if you don't, change the experience completely internally right up to the back end, it will fall somewhere, and then thereafter the experience goes for a toss. So completely reimagining your back end, whether it's your people or lack of people, whether it's your IT architecture, how do you sort of introduce 10 solutions a week like Amazon does? Banks don't manage to introduce 10 solutions a week, right? Not even one. Yeah? So I think there's a lot of challenges, but the customer is king, has always been the king, except the king likes to keep changing the way they operate all the time, and we as banks have just to keep up with that.
Rajeev, just your thoughts. I mean, RBL has been, among the fastest growing institutions. You've also been fairly innovative in the way you've actually taken your business to market. And the one specific question that I did have for you apart from that was, you also operate with a branch network which is a lot smaller than some of your competition. As you think about the future, and how do you think about technology, data, and the partnerships that you've created in the ecosystem, playing a game in the new age when you will not necessarily have a physical network which will help you compete with some of the others?
Yeah, thanks. I think I'll agree with what Manju and Shanti said. Though, let me just make one comment that 2-3 years from now, we will not be talking data, digital technology. We'll be back talking human emotions, pain, comfort, likes, dislikes. And I think it's very important for us to bring that back because, even now we discuss, I have data, I have technology, what can I do with it? So just as an example, and I'll address your question on branch versus non-branch too. When we work with partners, it's a very, very strategic option and alternative for us because we think the customers are going to come from many sources, many avenues, and not just through the pipe we've built. How do we provide that experience along with the partner at those touch points? So think about the consumer who's not very savvy as a digital consumer. He or she still goes to the Kirana store, deals with everything there, including buying bus tickets and mobile prepaid. How do you deliver a very, very simple banking quote-unquote experience? So there actually, you have to work with the Kirana store and actually figure out how do they use their money. It's a cash to a digital conversion. But in the minds of the customer, it's not digital. In the minds of the customer is, I come to this store for buying 5 things. If I can also borrow, if I can also withdraw money or deposit money or pay my EMI or send my money remittance, that's very convenient. I don't want to use a smartphone. I don't have a smartphone. I don't know how to use an app. My bandwidth is very expensive. Battery charges are very, it breaks down. And by the way, the branch is 5 kilometers away. I don't like the ATM, and now with Aadhaar, I can use it. So we've seen actually in the last several years, and we've been morphing our model that the consumption of financial services by segments like this is actually not what you would call strictly digital in an urban context, but actually for a customer, it's getting the job done. And I think that's a very important streak in organizations because, when we look at this entire digital data technology, we think that it's going to be available for everybody because you have IBM, you have many other smart partners who want to educate along with you guys. But what's going to ultimately make things happen is what's the internal pace of change? How do we iterate? How do we look at the customer's pain, etc., with the tools that we have today? And I don't think we need to reinvent everything. And how do you keep iterating? So we like the fact that in this world, you learn by shipping. You don't learn by developing everything and then shipping it. And I think that, to me, is the most important thing of customer journey, because when all is said and done, everybody has the same technology, everybody has a similar structure for data, and everybody will have an app. It's how it relates to the customer, and then how do you keep changing it. So those are the things we are trying to imbibe after having learned a lot about data and technology.
Sudhakar, you sit in a unique vantage point as you think about this from the outside and very soon, from the inside. How do you think about, both, as Rajeev said, the human side of it combined with the data and technology? When you think about disruption, you think about customer acquisition and value capture.
Good morning to everybody. I think Rajeev stole my speech. So it's really about platform banking. It's really about building a platform for the customers to come and use in a friction-free manner. The way we look at digital, the way I look at digital is, it is not just about the 100-odd million people in India who are using internet, mobile, apps, browser, whatever to do transactions. There is the other 1.1 billion who today have cash, and we can create that or move that cash from a cash to merchant transaction to a digital to merchant transaction. I think that is where the big opportunity is, especially for players like us who have the advantage of a large network. So Rajeev spoke about Kirana stores. So we already have access to 2 million such points where people are doing the recharges. Our customers from the telcos are coming and doing the recharges. So our experiment has been to convert that cash into a wallet to a merchant transaction rather than a cash to merchant transaction. And some of the experiments when we've tried has made a significant difference, specifically when we say customer experience. So it's not just about having a platform. So we have a platform today where we are doing everything from a bus tickets to a hotel to e-commerce. And it is working extremely well. And like Rajeev said, we've partnered with many people. It is not our platform. It's not our manufactured or business lines. But what has worked well is when we focus on that particular customer's experience. So I have a person who has a feature phone. And the feature phone customer, how can he or she do digital transactions? And especially with the connectivity and whatever issues that sometimes people do face, it's getting much lesser now, but it's still the fear of connectivity remaining there. So what we did is when we went and saw these merchants, availability of POS in those locations and cards are very, very low, given the current environment. What we created was, instead of getting the customer to use his or her phone, open an app, and scan a QR code and make the payment, which was getting a very, very long and much friction journey. So we got the merchant to use his app. We trained the merchant to use the app to pull money. And all the customer gets in a feature phone or a smartphone is an SMS saying, this is the amount, this is the place, and here is the OTP. What we found when we did something like that was an immediate shift and a rapid increase in the transaction, because it's much easier to train the merchants to do it rather than expecting all the customers to come around and doing it. So we suddenly saw a physical customer who used cash is now putting that money in a wallet and getting that money transferred from her or his phone, just because the application and the customer user interface is very different. So these are all initial experiences. We're still trying out these pilots, but the learnings have been very, very good. So if we can follow some of this, I think there is a way forward. And it doesn't take time to build some of these experiences, Agile or Waterfall or Scrum or whatever. It doesn't take too much time to build this once you have the journey in mind. If you start thinking from a customer perspective, I think the solutions come.
Shinjini, I had two specific, places where it would be useful to get your perspective. One, as the head of a business which might not have some of the advantages of a large network, how do you think about delivering that experience? How do you think about customer acquisition? And the second is, as you sit at the intersection of what you're seeing globally with Citibank and as you see how it's playing out in India, where do you see some of the things that Indian banking could actually either imbibe from that or even export?
Thank you. The branch network has been a subject of much conversation. There are different ways to think about it, and we've already heard a few perspectives right now. But sometimes it just helps to stretch your thinking and think of the absence of something, because that helps you to think with a little bit more clarity about what you're trying to do. So, and there are a couple of banks, at least in the world, that have thought about banking without a branch altogether. And we could quibble about the demographics, about the product suite, about the size, about the customer incentive and all of that. But if you just park all of that and think about what it does when you visualize a situation where branch is not your port of call, you are then automatically thinking about relating to your customer in all the different ways. And I'm trying to make this conversation without using the word digital or data. But if you just keep yourself as the service provider and the customer as the person who requires the service, what is your relevance to that customer is either you are helping him to save, or you are helping or grow his wealth, or you are helping him to access money at a time when he needs it, hopefully also at a place where he needs it, and you are helping him do transaction to move his own money to a different person for goods or services or whatever. Now, if you think about it, if that's what I'm required to do for the customer, agnostic to whether I have a branch, whether there's a mobile phone, whether there is an iPad, how can I do that to match his sense of urgency is what I have to think about. So one of the things in customer service or customer experience is that very often, there are very few products where the urgency of the buyer and the seller are the same. So I like to always give the example of the fish market, where the urgency on the part of the seller is very, very high because the product will not last. And urgency on the part of the buyer is always optional. They can have fish or they can have something else. And then you take it to the other extreme, where a person is selling electric iron or something, right? It can be bought any other day by the buyer, it can be sold any other day by the seller. And in the latter scenario, the sense of urgency is not created by the nature of the product or the service, but is created by competition. So therefore you see mega sales, therefore you see discounts, therefore you see incentives, and until such a thing happens, so all of us remember a time in India where Bajaj used to manufacture scooters and people used to line to buy the scooter. Maruti used to make the car, and I have personally, I was expecting my first child and I wanted the car, and I've moved heaven and earth to get my car delivered on time. So that sense of urgency between the seller and the buyer is the most critical to how do you visualize your customer journey. The one thing that the mobile phone has done is reduce the distance and time between your buyer who handles that device and your processor, which is where his data and his information and the ability to serve lies. Everything in between is actually redundant. How do you think that and then create your service ability is what you are pushed to think when you think without the branch. Of course, we do have branches because we do value customers, and there are different lifestyles, there are different journeys, there are different customers. But to answer your question, is the lack of a branch a handicap to service the customer? The answer will have to be no in this day and age.
Pablo, as you think of it from a technology perspective, what do you see as some of the priorities as banks try and capture the value from it, transform the technology, make sure that technology architecture is ready for the future? What do you see as some of the priorities? What do you also see as some of the challenges as banks go through this journey?
Well, first of all, thank you. And an apology for my pronunciation. I learned it in New York, so I have that good excuse. Let me go backwards. Technology is not the essence of the solution. Business will drive change, and technology will follow. Technology will be as successful as the target operating model that you define. No matter how good the technology, no matter how easy or cool, as the Americans would say, a technology comes from, will affect. And I'm going to follow up on some of very good ideas that the panel said. The first thing is that customer experience is as good as the expectations of your clients. And each one of your clients is going to have different expectations because not all of you go for the same markets. So that's the first thing. Second, Rajeev said something very important in my opinion, which is, what is the pace of change of that set of customers that you have? I've been in banking for 35 years of my life. Been a banker 15 years, the rest here in IBM. But very interesting, I understood that every time we open the channel, we say, this channel will kill the other one. And what's happened today is we have a multi-channel view where customers, the ATM didn't kill the tellers, the call centers didn't kill the ATMs, and now, actually, mobile is not killing the rest. Yes, it has 50% of the transactions that come into a financial institution, but it's not the financial institution. We were talking early this morning, we still open most of the accounts through web browsers and not through mobile technology. So the combination of all of that comes back to a point that was made a moment ago also about how do we integrate that information that goes and flows through the multi-channels. And it all comes from the business. We see, if we continue to see the world in a verticalized manner through channel or product, we never are going to be capable of integrating, truly integrating the information in a way that is useful to cover the expectations of that client that I want to cover. The expectations of the client is that if he goes to a branch because he doesn't like technology, he's going to get the service that he expects. And when it comes to a technology, he can follow through what he discussed. A customer wants, when he gets his ATM card stuck in an ATM, wouldn't it be nice that the bank calls him about losing his card? Isn't the bank the first one who knows that the card was followed by the ATM? And not calling the call center saying, what's your problem? You should know what your problem is. And it's the other way around. Oh, well, we'll take care of it, no worries. And then what happens? He goes to a branch to recover his card, and the first thing he asks, why are you here? Oh, let me tell you that I lost my card. And it's all about the silos in the channels. It's all about the silos on the operation. So technology is going to be as good as we all define the customer journey. That is the customer journey. The ability to use all the tools that we have at hand to facilitate and cover the expectations of our clients in a truly, fully integrated manner. Until we do that, dreaming on the way that we're going to build platforms that we're going to integrate and serve like the Amazons of the world is not going to happen. If you go to UPS or you go to Amazon, or the first thing they'll ask you, people like you, they compare you, also want these things like you. How many times has your bank advised you, goes in advancement of something you do? And just to challenge ourselves in the customer journeys. How many times has a customer woke up in the morning and said, I'm going to get a loan? That doesn't happen. He says, I want a car, I want to go on vacations, I want to buy a house. How many times having the data in the banks cover the expectations of the life events of a client. The moment that we start giving advice, the moment that we start giving elements and using technology to get a better relationship of what's important to me, it should not be important if my payment of my credit card went through. That is normal expectation of a service of a client. It should be, can I use my credit card in the shop I'm going to get something I want? Because that is the life expectancy of what we use as customers. So going back to the point, omnichannel is fundamental, but at the very end, it's about not the vertical view of the banks, but the horizontal, across the board, across all channels, across all services, to compare and use technology for a target operating model that you design for the expectations of your clients.
Thanks. Actually, Nishant, this is a good segue into just getting your perspectives around. As you think about it, banks have a lot of data. We've spoken about this, right? Our experience has been that banks typically use 1/3 of the data at their disposal. And the other point is around how do you just leverage customer insights, right? How do you just leverage the CRM platforms that banks have either acquired or built in a much more impactful and effective manner to just deliver a better customer experience, but more importantly, just drive better retention, better cross-sell. What's your perspective and views on that?
So I have a dual role here. I'm a technologist on the panel and been fortunate enough to work with a lot of leaders. And let me step back before I answer that question, because what's really happening in banking is that banking is getting commoditized. And what's really happening today is you cannot create a product that your competitor cannot copy in 5 months. So then what's really setting the winners from the people who also ran? And I think one of the first things when you think of it like that is, what is this new concept of digital? Is digital a project to you, or is digital a core? So one of the things that we've seen consistently with winning banks is that they look at this whole paradigm and they say, hey, actually, in this new world, I need a new operational model. And the new operational model means I need to change everything that I needed to do first, starting from the back office. Because that will then enable you to deliver a great experience in the front office. So what happens is your customers today are looking for respect, they want to do things frictionless, and they want to be in control of this relationship. Now your old operational model was never set up like this, right? So basically, when you think of setting up a bank 2.0 operational model within you, or whatever version you may use, you then start to discover that if I have to give customer control, then there are around 187 customer journeys that will completely invert your entire bank control to people. And you need to have these discussions because 5 years ago, people said cards couldn't drive themselves. There was the first $1 billion of DARPA that nobody ever won. And I think today you're seeing some banks step up and say, can I have an autonomous machine running the bank? At least the physical work design aspect of it. Right now, these are some very far-reaching ideas. And then you start to play the more realistic goals of how do I achieve my target, how do I get my cross-sell ratios, and is that sticky enough so that the guy then buys more product with us? And see, as many people said, you don't get up in the morning thinking I'm going to buy this product. It's a need-based. So one of the best things that we've always talked about is if you can create a really frictionless experience for customer, then he's going to buy the product from the one which is the most convenient and the point of availability, at the nearest point of availability to him. And this we've seen play out in industries after industries after industry. So today, the entire rush that you see in customer journeys, the most visible part of which may be the acquisition journeys, is an outcome of that. Today, you see developed countries where, your mortgage will be run by somebody else, cards will be run by somebody else. You will go and have a savings account with a credit union if you're US because you don't trust the large banks now. So again, it's depending on the geographies you play. And in India, we have a very diverse geography to play. We have people who can't read and write to people who have been born digital native, have always shopped on Amazon. So literally answering that back, think if you really want to create this operational model, Amazon could not have done anything without all the back-end logistics that enable you to shop so seamlessly on this. So I think it's far deeper. This is the age of what we call as the iceberg model of digital. It lies more deeper than you see it. You can always get a quick start in the beginning, but as everybody said on this panel, great digital is going to give you lot more customer affinity, I would say, but also huge transaction savings. Because this whole next generation, as we call it, the 2.0, whatever maybe your operational model, is far more automated, far more frictionless, requires far less people, and is agnostic to where you run it. So I think that's what I would like to add, and of course, CRM being one of the touch points that you use across your channels when you get into the assisted mode or the unassisted mode today. We do play a lot of factor, but as I said, 5 minutes would be not enough for that, but that's just a perspective.
Mr. Agarwal, I had one question for you, a follow-up question actually, and there's a lot of talk around digital, but there are two different worlds, right? So there is a set of consumers which are the millennials or people who live in the metros who are either due to the digital infrastructure or the awareness they have, significantly more evolved, and some of them are even digital natives, but you have a large part of India which is either across the income strata or geographically operates in a very different world, but still has similar expectations from the bank. They still need experience, and State Bank of India operates in that world. You kind of cut across segments. How do you think about delivering solutions which kind of cut across these segments, either income or geographically, to ensure that your customer gets the experience that they need?
See, when we talk about digital, it is not only about, as we discussed, as Sudhakar and Mr. Rajeev mentioned, is not only about the platform. If you have a physical reach and you are able to give a digital experience to the customer within the branch or through a business correspondent or a merchant establishment, that your purpose is achieved. We are trying to do that. We have launched this wallet with BSNL, where the customer is helped in having the same digital experience through the BSNL outfits. Now, these are customers who we do not expect to be on smartphone. If he is on a smartphone, he has the option to download any application and get started. We are looking at customers who are with the feature phone, and they also have the digital aspirations. So these are the customers who can reach one of the BSNL outfits, and they can get a wallet, and the money can get loaded through in an assisted mode at that outfit, and he's able to consume that money in a digital form. For the consumption also, the outfit can assist or can guide him, which he can do on his own also. So we are doing it through the relationship with BSNL. We are doing it through our branches also. We are working on a project which will be made operational maybe by this month end or maybe by middle of next month, where we expect customer to open an account in a self-assisted mode. He need not visit the branch. He can do part of the journey on a mobile or internet. And if he kind of gets stuck, he can move into the branch, walk into any branch, and the journey will get started from there only. You talk about omni-channel experience. Our business correspondents, which are as many as almost 60,000 in number, and they are mostly present in rural and semi-urban geographies. They help customers in doing a transaction on micro ATM, as we call it. They also help customer in doing a Aadhaar-based transaction. We have acquired merchant on Aadhaar also. So we are, and we have deployed POS machines more in rural and semi-urban geographies compared to the competition. Most of the POS machines you would find confined primarily in metro and very little in semi-urban. That probably is the reason that post-demonetization, while the transactions of competition on debit card have gone down for us, there's a huge increase because we deployed terminals in geographies where merchants were never terminalized. And these were the merchants who started accepting digital transactions, and there's quite a good acceptance on the part of consumers to go and swipe cards there. So we are doing it through various modes. See, you can offer multiple products to the customer. The product which will take up is one which probably he knows how to use it and he is confident about. I believe that a POS and a debit card probably is the best way to digitalize a transaction, because you have 800 million debit cards. All these customers know how to use the card. They've been going to ATM, swiping the card, putting the pin and getting the money. So they have no concerns as far as security is concerned. They have no concerns as far as usage practice is concerned. What is lacking probably is the terminalization of merchant. The moment you are able to terminalize merchants, all these transactions can be digitalized, and transactions on POSs can go down substantially, actually.
Shanti, one question for you. I think there was a fair bit of discussion in the last 40 odd minutes around people. Like, you, and I think you also refer to the word digital. While people go digital, at the end of the day, the customer experience that gets delivered will also depend upon the people the bank staff who interact with the customers, or even internally how you mobilize the organization around it. Your thoughts around what's required to be done, because very often in this whole digital discussion, that part gets, at times underappreciated about how much that is critical to delivering the experience that customers need.
No, it's a very important perspective, because that is also part of the customer experience. Like I said, the customer can come through any channel, and branch and call center are two channels where they interact with a human voice or a human being. And I think it's as important to spend time, energy, and money in skilling and training people. What does the customer expect? When he or she walks into a branch, that the person on the other side is knowledgeable, is able to provide a solution, real time, and is able to sort of resolve any issues, as you said, rather than say, I'll call you later. Now, you need 2-3 critical things. A, every employee who is serving the customer needs to be enabled with a click of a button that can access any customer data, products, services, where they last left off, etc. And second, needs to have the skill and the training to be able to resolve and immediately provide a resolution. Now, banks, my rate regulations, my rate products, my rate charges. I mean, you need a Google in your head to be able to search engine to search for all the solutions. So how are you able to enable your front-end staff to be able to provide the right solution and train the staff is extremely important. Now, when you get to a call center, all they can hear is a voice, right? Empathy, friendliness, all of this, I think training of people, providing them the right tools and getting the orientation, and more importantly, empowering them to take a decision. And I'll give you a small example, very interesting. We got a irate client who called up at 12 o'clock in the night and said, you know what, I'm sitting in office and I have lost my debit card and I don't have money for food. I want a debit card now. 12 o'clock at night at Gurgaon, a customer calls up to say, I can't find my debit card, I've lost my debit card, I want it now. And he just started shouting and screaming, obviously there's hunger. So the person on the other side suddenly realized that probably this guy is hungry. And he suddenly said, sir, can I order you some food? He said, what? You said you don't have your debit card and you're hungry. Can I offer some food to you? So the customer said, are you for real? He said, yes. I mean, you're hungry, right? Can I get you some food? So the guy thought he was joking. So he said, okay. So this chap quickly calls up Food Panda and orders food for him, right? In 40 minutes, the food reaches him. Customer was delighted. Next morning, he called up to say, apologize for the rudeness. Wonderful that you gave me a solution. I'm going to give you more business. Now, it was presence of mind at 12 o'clock, right? You don't train people like this. But you have to adhere to a need of the customer. At 12 o'clock, the customer was irate because he had food and he didn't have credit card to go withdraw cash and draw money. I'm saying, how do you train people like that? So, in a way, human interactions, whether it's in a call or a physical part, is important. You need to empower, you need to enable them to think out of the box, and you've got to train them to see it's not just policies and process, but you're dealing with a human and try to see how you address the need of the humans. Whole orientation.
Rajeev and Sudhakar, I had one last question for you before I open up to any closing comments from the panel. How do you drive the pace of change within your organizations? How do you culturally, just mobilize the organization to operate at a pace, which is, Rajeev, you touched upon this, right? Which is, how do you take solutions to market in a more iterative manner quickly rather than wait for the perfect solution? That requires mobilizing the organization in a manner which is fundamentally different from how banks have operated in.
So I think it's also what stage of life you're at. And I think we are still at that stage where, actually we can make these changes and experiments. So what we've done is basically build a team for some of the faster moving services we need to keep iterating. And then you also have a combination of skills. So it's just not about technology, as I said, it's just not about banking. You also need a mix of skills, and actually in some of these teams we have more youngsters than people with 25, 30 years of experience. And I think what you need to do is also give a sense of empowerment, and I think also the fact that failures is not going to be ridiculed or penalized. I think that's very important. And then quickly you need to, by osmosis, infect, quote unquote, other parts of the organization. So I think it's a process, it's a culture, and there's no like script for it. You just need to do it day in, day out, and it needs obviously the senior people who call the shots and resourcing need to kind of live the same journey. And I think we've run this for experiments for the last 6, 12 months. It's not easy, let me put it this way, because banks are still structured more for internal reasons. And there's some good reasons for that, compliance, RBI, protection of data. But I think on the margin, things are changing. And I think over the next few years, we will see that, our response time, our clock speed, somebody made a reference to, and how we learn about customers is going to get better and better. But there's no alternative to, let's jump in the pool and then learn how to swim.
Sudhakar, for you, innovation will have to be the bedrock as I think about it from a business model perspective. How do you just instill that culture within the organization?
We are a bit lucky because we don't have a baggage, right? So it's a new team, and the team has come from varied walks of life. So we've had people with banking experience and a whole lot of people who don't. And it is a constant a set of difference of opinion between the two. We have telecom teams, we have technology teams, we have banking teams, we have financial services teams. So we have different sets of people. I think there's a lot of debate that happens, and everybody understands, and like Shinjini said rightly, in her context it was lack of branches that became the reason why they have to think out of the box. In our case, it's the lack of flexibility in the licensing. So it is a limited license, and hence we necessarily have to think out of the box in order to be able to succeed and do this business well. So that business necessity is what has created much of the innovations that we are being able to work on and develop. The team thinks quite differently. The team is engaged in a different context, that if a bank is doing it in such a way and the customer wants it a little different, how do we think everything from a customer perspective? Once we put ourselves in customer shoes, I think the solutions emerge. Not necessarily very different, but the way the solutions emerge and the way the solutions get developed, it works on the ground, and that's what we have seen. But it's been a good experience in the last 1.5 years to get this team together. We'll see how it goes.
I think before I open up to any questions from the audience, any further comments from the panel? Yeah, Pablo, please go ahead.
Just one last comment. The customer journey and the service is going to be as good as the people you have on the other side. You made a very interesting comment relative to the attention you get. So we have to not only invest in technology, we have to invest on the pace of change of our own people. Change management is a fundamental piece of how we're going to impact the service idea. If we don't invest on that, we're not going to get that pace of change. And the second, measure the change. KPIs are a fundamental piece of understanding what you're doing right and wrong. So key performance indicators should be part of the structure of change as you go forward. And it all has to go around the people that are providing that change.
I think we have about 5 to 7 minutes, if I'm not mistaken, for any questions from the audience. I hope, we can get mics across to them if that's not a problem, please. Yes, if you could just wait for one moment till we get your mic, if that's possible. Otherwise, why don't you go ahead, please? You'll have to speak a bit loudly, that's the only request.
Hearing about the role of banking sector from financial intermediary to a parking place for money to financial service provider. So changing role of banking sector that have been shared by different panelists. Now in this context, one thing that comes to our mind is what could be the possible role that banks have played in the past with a wish to national economy, economic growth, financial vision of the government, etc. In this case, when their role and their capability to play that role is very much restricted, which is appearing now, because there are so many competitors looking to have that same portion of cash or money going from one entity to other.
So, if I understand your question is that with other competitors coming in, what's the role of banks going forward? Is that, to put it simply, the question?
Yeah, in terms of helping economic vision of the country.
Sure.
Yeah.
Would anyone like to take that, please? Yeah, please, go ahead.
See, there was a time when banking sector was not nationalized. So they were catering to a small section of the society. Then it was decided to nationalize them, and then they were dancing and playing to the tunes of the government. And whatever they did was a kind of a diktat from the government. I think both the situations were not in the best interest of the country, economy, or maybe the customers. Then came the old generation private sector banks, new generation private sector banks. And banks have lived through the competition all these years. It's not that banks have not seen competition in the past. And irrespective of the competition, they have been able to deliver to the government in terms of their national priorities or economic priorities. They have been lending or rising to their expectations, be it opening of Jan Dhan accounts or delivery of small value insurance products or pension products. Now all this competition only drives us to make our operations more efficient. So I don't think the competition is going to kind of drive us to loss making, or whatever loss public sector or the stress public sector is seeing today is not because of competition actually. I think we need to understand that. It is primarily because certain decisions on corporate lending went wrong, and it was not because we did those lending under some diktat or some pressure from any quarter. You look at the macroeconomic situation. If the pain is is there only in one player, two player, or three player, maybe some decision making went wrong with those three. But if the pain is there in the entire industry, then probably we need to look at beyond the banking players or the industry per se. We need to find solutions for this problem through means which probably is not beyond in the controls of the bank, and government is trying to address those problems. Competition is going to make us more efficient. It's only going to make our delivery platforms, our deliveries more customer friendly, and I think it is good for everybody, and government is also trying to achieve that only.
Thank you. You took some of what I was going to say, but you know, I'm passionate about this subject because I've been in policy making, and you know, I'm in a customer business. I think one of the fundamental flaws that one can suffer from is to think that you're doing a favor to the customer. The whole impetus by the government to drive priority sector lending or financial inclusion is just the most well-meaning and well-intentioned exercise that can be on the face of this earth. But what it has done is created this psychology of favor giving by the banking system to their clients. And it goes to the core of the customer experience and the customer journeys that we are talking about. We're not doing them a favor. The aggregated picture of a beneficiary is very much contrary to the picture of the customer. If you think about the number of hardworking people in this country who are not sitting and waiting for a job to come their way, because we do have you know, limited growth and limited job opportunities, but they are so entrepreneurial, and the one thing that has made all the difference to their lives is their mobile phones. I mean, I could just go on and on about the number of women and young men and older men that I know in rural India, urban India, semi-urban India, that have taken the opportunity to use the access to the internet and the mobile to improve their lives and to do things with it. As a banker, it is my responsibility and it is our collective responsibility to meet that person's requirement and expectation and serve him regardless of what the government is, and the government is saying a good thing, so I'm not saying that it's not something that should be done. But I'm saying we have to start thinking outside of that. So nation building is, we are not the only ones. That guy who is your borrower, that guy who's your saver, that guy who's coming to you for a good customer experience is the person who's doing the nation building as well. So I just think that we need to not lose the objective from a customer's perspective.
Sorry, I have time for one last question, please. We're going to run out of time. My apologies for that, but that's the last one, please.
So I'll go ahead and optimize the time. I have two questions, one for Shinjini and one for Shanti. Shinjini, you've seen both the fintech space and now the traditional banking space. So the game of fintechs are more on the valuation, whereas traditional banking is all about ROI, and every single dollar has to deliver a certain ROI, or you're going to reinvest it in a different part of the business. So how about traditional? So the competition is not technology, because banks can pick up technology and do it well. But the question is in terms of what are the investments and what is the ROI that you are looking for, which is a different game that fintechs play. So that's the first part of the question for you. Shanti, I am a 811 customer. Thank you. It's an amazing experience there. So I went through the experience and I did my Aadhaar through OTP. And then a month later, someone called me and said, sir, I need your biometric, right? For truly digital and a paperless process, I don't have to interact with the person. I have to do a self-service, right? So do you see that OTP, Aadhaar-based OTP is something that's going to come through, or it's always going to be that there's going to be a human intervention and biometric is always going to be a mandatory element of KYCs, and therefore it's never going to be a truly digital, and there's probably a hybrid approach that will always remain. So thank you.
No, you've asked very short questions, so I thought I stopped answering this question last year. But very simply, I think different organizations have different stakeholders and different objectives. How you set your goals and how you think about your customer segment, your service, your operating model, your technology has to be driven by who you are and not by who the next person is. And in particular in India, we are a very large economy, and at this stage, the relevance of different players is very high. Of course, there are lots of lessons to be drawn from different economies like China or Mexico or US. If you see different economies, they've gone different ways, and India will go a different way. But I don't think that you define your strategies vis-a-vis how the other person's shareholding or investor management is. So I don't think that worries me in any way.
So let me answer your question on the biometric part. If you see what happens on an OTP is just a number and you get the details, but the biometric authentication is really the identification to prevent any fraud. We have been, as I see it going forward, you can go to your ATM, do your biometric, you can walk into the branch today, do your biometric, you can have a salesperson come in, maybe you can do it at your local store. We've also been engaging with the regulators, and if you look around the world, for example, in Germany, you can do video-based authentication. So for example, you can open your 811 account, and then I call out to you through a video call. You can actually do an authentication and signature. So there are many other ways of completing the KYC without just a final biometric authentication. Remember, in a country this size, there are risks and there are security concerns that are important. So I think suffice to say for now that there has been a huge movement from what used to be pure paper to a completely paperless. I think we will look, and I think regulations will evolve where the last mile physical contact could go away and you could do that digitally too. But we'll see what that comes out.
Thank you. I wanted to thank all of you for the panel and their viewers, and thank you very much.